all welcome you to our presentation, our panel presentation today, which is really trying to, it has a large topic, but they're going to make sense out of some of it. We're going to be talking about the effects of Trump's economic policies on both the state of New Jersey and its residents. Let me introduce before I introduce the two speakers, what I'd like to do is there are a couple of announcements that I think most of the people in the room want to hear. So the first is Don Stern.
Yeah. So I just wanted to take a moment to remember Tina Whitehouse, who we lost this week. She was a dear friend, a member of Indivisible, a member of every worthwhile activity going on in these parts of the state. I won't ask for a moment of silence because that would be the last thing Tina would have wanted from us. She would have wanted us to be doing just what we're doing here tonight. So let's just remember.
Kevin?
So thanks, Don. Tina was someone that touched so many of our lives and crossed so many issues, so I'm really happy that you mentioned her. So what I wanted to mention is, as you might know, is June 14th is Flag Day. Our esteemed, I don't know what we want to call him, has decided that is, of course, it's his birthday, isn't it?
Yes.
That it's an occasion to have a vast military exercise. We're countering it. Indivisible is having a series of rallies all across the country in association with a lot of other groups. We're having one in Highland Park. So please come, June 14th, Saturday. Meet at the Soldiers Memorial at 11 o'clock. We're going to have a gathering there, a little bit of speechifying, but I guarantee it will not be very long. By about 11:30, we will then be moving down on both sides of Raritan, not on the street. I'll come back to why we can't do that. On the sidewalks, converging on Raritan and River Road with banners, with signs, and staying there for an hour. Okay? So please come with signs and banners. Think of the themes of what patriotism really means to me. What does freedom mean? And let's think about how we want to define those events and not the way Trump is defining them, okay? So please come with signs, and we're going to be having probably a slogan contest, right? So.
Yeah, what we did, I don't know about you, but I often go to these rallies and I see these absolutely witty, incredible signs, and I go, why didn't I think of it? But of course, I never do. So Indivisible Highland Park is going to be announcing a slogan contest, asking people to come up with some kind of slogan, either about Flag Day, freedom, or No King's Day, as is the theme of there, that we don't have a king. And to give you an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, I saw one on a lawn in Connecticut a couple weeks ago that said, Americans, fighting monarchies since 1776.
Right.
So, if we can match that, that would be terrific. We're going to be setting up, you're going to be asked to submit things, and you tell your friends, anybody, to submit things to Indivisible Highland Park at our Gmail address. And then we're going to be sending out a survey after the deadline to basically ask people to vote on which ones they liked. And the top two winners will get an Indivisible t-shirt.
Right, but they'll be getting a banner.
Yes, and the two winning slogans will get long banners which are going to spread out on the side, each side of Raritan Avenue, way down by the bridge, so that we're finally going to take advantage of the fact that we have all these cars going through all the time, and they'll be able to see the message, because as they go up, they will be able to read it.
When is the deadline for this?
We haven't figured that out yet, but it's going to be soon.
Well, we'll put, our newsletter should be coming out tomorrow. We promise you we'll have it in the newsletter.
Thinking now.
Yes. So,
Okay.
and please, the temptation will be to come up with 20 words because you want a gigantic banner, but please don't. So we'll be having that. Please bring placards. Please bring flags. Show the flags. We need to recapture the flag for what we define as patriotism.
Great.
So please bring that. Now, what I want to tell you just a little bit, we had thought that we would march down Raritan Avenue, and we had a conversation with the city officials, and they said, "You poor naive person, you do realize this is a state highway." I said, "Oh, that's right." They said, "That means you've got to get state permission." I said, "Oh, this is starting to sound bad. You have to apply a month in advance." I'm talking to them a month in advance. "You have to have insurance coverage." We say, "Well, we have no budget." So that's up. "You have to pay for police officers at every corner." I said, "Oh, well, we don't have that." So this is why we're walking down the sidewalks, okay? And it's really important people stay on the sidewalks.
Just look committed but casual.
Yeah, that's it. Not corporate casual, but, political casual. So anyway, so again, it's Saturday, the 14th, 11 o'clock. A little bit of speechifying. We'll then go down to River Road and Raritan. And we're hoping that you might consider 2 events after that. At 2 o'clock, there will be another No Kings rally in Rahway, and that will be in our newsletter. And by the way, I should say, our rally here is in cooperation with the Democratic Club here in town, and with Indivisible Central Jersey, which is centered in Metuchen and Edison, and with Indivisible Rahway, and we're also supporting then the event with them in Rahway. The other thing to consider is that 2 o'clock as well, or I think is it 3 o'clock, I'm trying to remember, but it'll be in our newsletter. Juneteenth is being celebrated by the Metuchen Edison Piscataway NAACP at a center in Edison. I'll be going there. If anybody would like to join me, please let me know. But please think of that event as well, because in a way, I'd love to have us think about Juneteenth and Flag Day in very close proximity. Let's think about that as well. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Last but not least, Josh Hameson, he has an announcement.
Yeah, so another way to fight back against our esteemed he who shall not be named. We're focusing on what we think could be one political vulnerability, which is the cutbacks in staff at the Social Security Administration. So some of us have been going to Social Security offices and looking for disgruntled people who come out and taking videos of their stories. And we've got various advocacy groups, including some in Tom King Jr.'s district, who we're hoping to flip in 26, to disseminate these videos, as well as media organizations and some national groups as well. So we're looking for more volunteers who are willing to hang out outside Social Security offices, or if you happen to know somebody who's been having trouble with Social Security and will share their story. You could just tell me about it, Josh Hameson. I'll be hanging out after the meeting if you're interested, or you can email me at joshuahameson@gmail.com. I think my information is in some of the Highland Municipal emails too.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
Kevin? Okay, now I'd like to introduce our 2 speakers and tell you something about them. Our first speaker is Stuart Shapiro. He's Dean and Professor of the Blaustein School of Public Policy at Rutgers. Dean Shapiro was named the Dean of the Blaustein School in April of 2023, and this is after 20 years on the faculty here at Rutgers. Prior to that, he got a PhD in public policy from Harvard and worked at the Office of Management and Budget under both Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. Dr. Shapiro teaches classes in economics, public policy, and politics, and has written 4 books and numerous articles in a variety of journals. He will be talking about how government affects your daily life normally, and how it might change under tariffs, deregulation, and government cutbacks. Our second speaker this evening is Peter Chen. He is Senior Policy Analysis at New Jersey Policy Perspective, which is one of the primary progressive think tanks, a lot of P's there, in New Jersey. At NJPP, he has worked on child and family policy in New Jersey since 2014. Most recently, he coordinated New Jersey's nonprofit campaign for a complete count of the 2020 census, and that indeed was very successful. We did not lose a congressman, where New York, who didn't put in that effort, did. Additionally, Peter has written reports on topics including childhood lead poisoning, chronic absenteeism, teacher certification, and summer meals. Prior to NJPP, Peter was policy counsel at Advocates for Children of New Jersey. He received his JD from Yale Law School and his BA from Indiana. He will be speaking on the impacts of the Trump administration's economic policies on New Jersey's state government and its residents. So, we'd like to start off with Stuart, if he could, and feel free to stand up, walk around, whatever.
I'll stay seated. That's fine. Thank you very much for having me today. It's wonderful to see so many people excited, curious, scared, and hopefully I can sort of explain the impacts of what the administration has done, and will be doing, and then Peter can talk a little bit about possible ways to combat that. I'm going to talk about three areas. The first is my area of specialty, which is deregulation or regulation, and the civil service. Then I'll talk about tariffs, because you can't turn on the news or your social media feed or anything like that without hearing about tariffs. And then I'll talk a little bit about the reconciliation bill, which passed the House this week, because that's particularly relevant and maybe among the most important things that's going on. So let me start with regulation and the civil service. And since the question asked was, how does this affect people's lives? I take you through an average day. You eat breakfast in the morning. The nutrition labels on your cereal and the safety of your food is ensured by the federal government, the Food and Drug Administration. If you're eating eggs for breakfast instead, then it's the Department of Agriculture. You drive to work or to school, you drive your kids or grandkids somewhere. The safety of the car is there because of regulations from the Department of Transportation, and they are enforced by the Department of Transportation. You drop your kids off at school, certainly if it's a public school, but even if it's not a public school, they get money from the Department of Education, and certainly people in those schools depend upon that money. You go to work, and you only have to work 8 hours, in part because of the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Department of Labor, which enforces that. If you need to take leave, also the Department of Labor and the Family Medical Leave Act. If you work in a job that might be dangerous, you're dependent upon the Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations to keep you safe. At some point during the day, you decide to check your investments, your 401k, and in that case, those investments are protected by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The reason you can trust those investments is because of the SEC. You go outside at lunch, the air you breathe is protected by the Environmental Protection Agency. I could go on and on and on. We do not go at all throughout the day without being touched by government regulation or the enforcement of those regulations, which is conducted by the people who work in the executive branch of government. The Trump administration is doing several things in this area. Most immediately, they are not enforcing regulations. Now, I happen to believe, and I think data shows, that most businesses will comply anyway. They are generally good citizens, but not all will. And some will take advantage of those situations to create unsafe workplaces, dirtier air, fraudulent investments, etc. And so the lack of enforcement of regulation will have some of those impacts. They intend to deregulate. They intend to remove a lot of those regulations so that even the good businesses, even the ones that are well-intentioned, won't have to do those things if they're successful. It's actually far more legally complicated to do than certainly the Trump administration believes. They learned that in the first administration, where they were wildly unsuccessful in deregulating. But they've also learned lessons and likely will be more effective at that this time. And then sort of my sort of chief concern at the moment, and the thing I'm spending the most energy thinking about when I'm not administering a school, is what they're going to do to civil servants. There is currently a regulation out for proposal and public comment. Comments are due June 7th from the Office of Personnel Management that would take a lot of the career civil service jobs and reclassify them as political positions. This will make it easier for this administration, any administration, to remove those people. So those people who are enforcing your regulations, protecting your air, protecting your workplace, et cetera, will be easier to remove under what's called Schedule F. If you Google Schedule F, there are plenty of resources, plenty of very smart people writing about the dangers that it presents. And so that will affect your lives, even though it seems kind of obscure and wonky. It is certainly one of those things that can have a significant impact in the long run. It will erode the expertise of the executive branch and mean that decisions that the next administration wants to make, the people won't be there to help them make it. And so that's the long run plan there. So that's area number one, regulation and civil servants. Second is tariffs. And so let me talk a little bit about how tariffs work. Tariffs are levies that are placed on things that are coming in to the country. When a company imports something, when it comes across the border, whether it's across land, across sea, via air, a fee must be paid to the government to get it into the country. That fee can come from the importing company. It can come from the company, the foreign company that's sending it. Actually, that doesn't matter. And one thing that some people don't seem to understand is it doesn't matter who actually forks the money over to the government. What's important is it costs more for producers to bring products to your shelves. That's the key part of a tariff. It's the same as when there were supply chain problems during COVID. That made it cost more for businesses to bring products to market, or made it impossible in some cases. When a company's costs go up, they have three choices. The first choice is they could take fewer profits. The second choice is they can reduce their costs elsewhere. That usually means firing people. Or the third is they can raise their prices. Now, I know many people want the answer to that question to be reduce your profits. But most businesses operate relatively close to a survival profit margin, particularly small businesses. If they reduce their profits, what's going to happen is before long, they're going to go out of business. It's not true of all businesses. It's certainly not true of businesses that have monopoly power or things like that. There are some bad actors out there in the business community, but most businesses simply can't reduce their profits. They have to have a certain amount of profit in order to survive, in order to pay their bills, in order to pay their shareholders. So that leaves two options, both of which are pretty unpleasant. Either they lay people off to reduce costs elsewhere, or they most likely, depending on what the good is and depending how much people are willing to pay, they raise their prices. So tariffs are inflationary. You will pay, if tariffs stay in place, you will pay more for most of the things that you buy. In addition, they may have effects on employment. There may be higher unemployment, more people outside the workforce as a result of tariffs. I should note, that doesn't mean that tariffs are 100% all the time bad. There are sometimes reasons to put in place tariffs. If goods are coming into this country and the country they're coming in from can charge a cheap price because they ignore environmental standards or they employ child labor, tariffs are, in my mind, entirely appropriate in that case, even though they will raise prices and may have some other negative economic impacts. But that's not what these tariffs are about. These tariffs are, I don't know what they're about, but they're not about that. And so that is a problem. Now, the tariffs themselves are bad for the economy, but equally problematic from the tariffs is the tremendous uncertainty that they cause. Many of you may have seen that a court yesterday ruled that some of the tariffs, many of the tariffs were illegal that Trump imposed. Earlier today, an appeals court stayed that ruling, so the tariffs are now back on. And even though this is because of the courts, these tariffs have been on and off and big and little and all of these things ever since they were first announced, depending on the mood of our, as you call him, esteemed leader, depending what he woke up with or what he was feeling. This uncertainty is also inherently bad, aside from the harm the tariffs cause, is inherently bad for the economy. Businesses like to plan. They like to decide, how much are we going to produce this quarter? How many people do I need to hire to do that? What kind of inventory do I need? Those are all decisions that are harder to make when you don't know what conditions you'll be making them under. So then you just take the most conservative approach possible. You don't hire people. You raise your prices. You do things that will keep you in business under worst case scenarios because you don't know if the worst case scenario is going to happen. So the tariffs really present a two-pronged challenge. One is the tariffs themselves. The other is the way they've been implemented has created tremendous uncertainty in the market. So that's tariffs. The way it affects you, of course, is mostly via higher prices, possibly via employment impacts as well. Finally, and this will be the briefest part on the reconciliation bill that passed. For everything we read about DOGE, most of what DOGE did was illegal. That doesn't mean it doesn't have very real impact. Sending all the workers from USAID home will make it very hard to rebuild the agency, even when the courts say you shouldn't have done that, it's illegal. It's not as if everyone's going to come back to work the next day and the agency will start working again. If you really want to cut back spending, you've got to pass bills in Congress. The House this week passed what's known as a reconciliation bill, a bill that requires only 50 votes in the Senate to pass. And the reconciliation bill does a bunch of things. It lowers taxes, or I should say it mostly keeps in place the tax cuts that were put in place in 2017 and were due to expire. For New Jersey residents, it also makes income and property state and local income taxes and property taxes deductible at higher income levels and to higher amounts than before. So there may be people in the room that will be better off because of that. They will be better off. They are in higher income classes, which is why they will be better off because of that. So it will reduce taxes and have impacts on that. Those 2017 cuts, no matter what happens in the Senate, I would be stunned if they don't get extended. I think that'll be part of any final bill. But as you may have heard, the Republican Party has people in it that like to pretend they are budget hawks, and they don't like deficits, and they don't like the national debt. So if you're going to reduce taxes and you want some cover for doing so, what you do is reduce spending. Well, you can't reduce the interest on the debt. Nobody wants to reduce defense spending. Nobody wants to touch Medicare or Social Security. So what does that leave? It leaves spending that helps needy populations by and large. And of course, the biggest target in the House bill has been Medicaid, the medical insurance program that protects people below certain income levels and protects a lot more of them because of the expansion that occurred under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. So the Medicaid cuts are severe. The SNAP cuts are severe. Now, I'm sure you are good people and you are unhappy that people will be losing their health insurance or their food stamps, but there are also direct impacts on you. And some of you may receive Medicaid or SNAP. Medicaid is partially funded by the states. And so if the federal government contribution to Medicaid is reduced, states have a very unpleasant choice to make. They can try and make up the gap, but that money has to come from somewhere. And where it's going to come from is all the other things that the state provides people. As Beth said, I work at Rutgers University. We are very concerned about the hits to financial aid and all the other reductions that the state will implement as a result of possible Medicaid cuts. There are other causes there too, but that's a big one. And it's not just Rutgers that will suffer, it's all sorts of things that the states do, aids to municipalities, aids to counties in maintaining roads, lots of things that we count on the state government for will be harder because of these Medicaid cuts. Okay, I've been largely depressing. I'm hoping Peter will lift the mood a little bit.
Guys. I'm going to stand just because I can't see the people. Yeah, I'll stand because I can't see everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Chen. This is senior policy analyst at New Jersey Policy Perspective. I'm our tax and budget analyst, and for those not familiar with NJPP, we are a state policy think tank focused primarily on economic, racial, and social justice. And a lot of that work means, working on tax and budget work, because that's where a lot of priorities for government are set, or where government reveals its values. I want to touch on a couple points that Stuart made, and particularly around this question of it's hard to come up with a comprehensive worldview of what they're thinking, because I don't know if there is one. But one thing that is important is that fundamentally there is what's the word? It's a zero-sum world, right? If you're losing, then I'm winning, right? It's like someone had a tweet which was every time I have a huge trade deficit with my grocery store, I keep going and handing them money, and I get all this food back, and I'm losing all this money to the grocery store. But you get the food back in exchange. But in this sort of zero-sum world, it's no, every dollar I should be getting that food for free, right? Or somehow I should be getting money back through this equation. And I think one thing with tariffs is to think of them as a sales tax. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of progressive and regressive taxes, but most states in the United States depend primarily on sales tax for their revenue. And sales tax is a regressive tax. It taxes lower income folks at higher rates and higher income folks at lower rates, because if you make $10,000 a year, what you buy consumes an enormous amount of your income. But if you make $1 million a year, you're not spending $1 million worth of, or anywhere close to $1 million worth of spending in a given year. So in quote unquote low tax states, whatever, my mother lives in Tennessee. So if you look at Tennessee, if you are in the bottom 50% of incomes in Tennessee, you pay higher tax rates than you pay in New Jersey. Everyone thinks of New Jersey as a high tax state, but it's not high tax relative to many low tax states if you only look at because we have higher dependence on an income tax, which is progressive. We have more reliance on property tax, which it's kind of not somewhere in between. But the point is if we think about the Trump tax cuts combined with the tariffs, the way that it shifts the overall revenue generation of the country is putting more of the burden on lower income people and taking the burden off of higher income people. Essentially reversing, many decades worth, completing a decades-long project to make the income tax worse. And so I think that's sort of like just as a broad backdrop, a way to think about this sort of trade-off that's happening here, and that goes through all of the, and this sort of zero-sum thinking applies to states too. The deficit hawks can look at this and say, see, we're cutting government spending, which is true, but mostly what they're doing is just pushing costs onto the states. So for example, the SNAP cuts. The SNAP cuts, they're not cutting the SNAP benefits. They're saying, well, the SNAP benefits will stay the same. It just states have to pick up more of the tab. Also, administrative costs, which are historically covered by the federal government, will pass that on to the states too. So that's $200 million additional dollars that New Jersey will have to find, and every state in the country is going to have to find to cover the gap that the feds are not paying for anymore. Again, it goes back to this thing of, if I'm not paying it, and someone else is paying it, I'm winning. This is great, right? But the hard part, and the reason why so many of these programs are structured the way they are, is because the federal government can deficit spend. We have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We can only spend what we take in tax revenue. The feds can print money. So they can, America's had a great deal since 1945 to just print money and be able to fund larger social programs without having to substantially raise tax rates. And now we seem to be going, well, we're going to cut these programs and we're going to pass these costs onto states who can't deficit spend the same way and put them in this sort of like difficult position of having to decide what to cut or whether to raise taxes. And so, on the SNAP front, this has budget impacts, but also has human impacts. If there are work requirements attached to SNAP, many people who are currently eligible will not be eligible, right? Because they're taking care of a family member, because they are retired, right? Because they are otherwise not able to. They're in school, right? Those are all people who may not be working for the purposes of the work requirements, but who would lose SNAP benefits, and that could be 100,000 people in New Jersey, depending on how the work requirements are implemented. Similarly, the Medicaid cuts will, although they're this is something that it's like a sleight of hand. They're saying this reconciliation package, it's only targeting so-called able-bodied adults, people who are, they're non-elderly, non-disabled. They are part of this expansion of Medicaid that took place as part of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And so we're targeting this population, not everybody else. But the problem is this population is really heavily paid for by the federal government. And so reducing the federal share that they're paying for this population means that now the states have to figure out how to cover more of that cost or kick people off of insurance, right? And the numbers that have been posited by the Department of Human Services here in New Jersey are really staggering, right? We're talking about 200,000 to 250,000 people losing insurance, along with the $3.6 billion in funding that the feds won't pay at the end of all this. Now again, one other sleight of hand here is the window for this is 10 years. So the bill gets all of its savings by pushing all of these to 2031, 2032, but those cuts might come sooner depending on how everything shakes out. So I just want to zoom out a little bit here and just think about the federal role in sort of state government. When you think about the state budget, right, the thing that they pass in June every year, they say it's a $58 billion budget. And that means that all of the state's revenues that it generates from taxes have to balance with the $58 billion that we spend of state dollars. But there's another part of the budget, which is federal revenues. Federal revenues make up almost half as much as all of the tax revenue that New Jersey generates, particularly Medicaid. Medicaid is like $12 billion. And then, Title I schools and SNAP and road funding and all of these things that we think of as being administered by state government, because they are administered by state government, are actually federal dollars. And when those federal dollars get threatened, that means the state has to figure out either how to pick up the tab or how to leave, or has to cut people off of benefits. And so, that's where these sort of difficult decisions are going to be made. The federal legislation essentially just, kicks that all back to the states and says, you figure it out. We're just taking away the money. you figure out how to do whatever you're going to do. And so this is going to create huge pressures on New Jersey's budget. Although we do have had more robust surplus over the last few years, particularly thanks to federal COVID spending, that money's gone. And so, we have a dwindling surplus, so cash reserves, and that rainy day fund will go really fast. We have about 40 days worth of funding for the state. So if the state loses, some Medicaid funding, which could start as early as the end of 2026, that surplus is going to go real fast if you want to keep people enrolled. And the flip side, right, it puts the states in this difficult position. What are you going to do? You're going to reduce benefits. You're going to kick people off of insurance. They're still going to get health care. And it might still be really expensive for them to go to an emergency room and get care. And so it just passes the cost on farther and farther. And it's sort of an undermining of the overall project of government, right? That there should be some basic level of care that people can receive and that they don't have to, go without basic health care or food. And yet, we seem to be in this place where the reconciliation package is a betrayal, right, of that fundamental deal. And so the impact on New Jersey becomes really substantial because of how our budget works. If we're missing those federal dollars and we need to make it up, there's no way to make it up other than cuts in programs, maybe cutting Rutgers, maybe cutting student financial aid, maybe cutting all kinds of things. Maybe cutting, property tax relief programs, maybe cutting like child tax credit. And the other option is raising more revenue. Our organization, New Jersey Policy Perspective, we are strong believers in raising more revenue. It's my job to tell many people, including the legislators in our state, that New Jersey actually needs to raise taxes, particularly on wealthy residents and corporations. And talking about raising taxes in New Jersey is a hard sell. But the math doesn't work any other way. If you want the basic level of services that you want, you have to pay for them. And there's no way for New Jersey to pay for them without additional taxation, especially if the feds are cutting funding on their end. So in the end, this is just the top level stuff. There's all kinds of stuff in this package that are disastrous for the state in particular. So there are a bunch of cuts to programs that benefit immigrant residents, even immigrant residents who are permanent legal residents, who are, for example, the child tax credit. At the federal level, it's incredibly important anti-poverty program. The reconciliation bill says that U.S. citizen children of non-citizen, even if only one parent is a non-citizen, can't receive the tax credit. So, for a state like New Jersey, where 40% of babies born in the state have a mother who was born outside of the United States, this is going to be a cost that doesn't show up on the balance sheet of the state of New Jersey, but does show up in the pockets of New Jersey residents, right? Similarly, there are, the state has a great program called Cover All Kids. Federal Medicaid, you hear stories, the immigrants, they're using all of these services, they're costing the government money. You can't use federal dollars to fund healthcare for undocumented people. So what the state does is a great program called Cover All Kids. It says, if you're a child, regardless of what your background is or whether you're eligible for federal Medicaid, you can enroll in this program, which uses the sort of structure of Medicaid, but the state pays all of it. It's fully paid for through state dollars, not a federal dime touches it. The reconciliation package says, well, if you have one of those programs, New Jersey or California or Hawaii or whoever else, we are going to cut your Medicaid funding. And so even though we're not even spending a dime on it, we're going to punish states that cover all of their kids. So when I say that, riddled throughout this stuff are just little ways of needling and attacking states and vulnerable populations. So yeah, I know you wanted good news. I don't know a lot, but what I will say is one important, and I think maybe one of the best defenses the state has to these kinds of, there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding all of these, and whether or not they actually kick some of these programs into place, even if they pass, which again, knock on wood, maybe they might not. I do think that there's a role for states to play in shoring up their defenses, particularly our cash reserves. Our cash reserves are pretty good now compared to what they've been historically. Certainly during the Christie administration, when they were like 1% of the total budget. Now we're close to like 10 or 11%, but that's still pretty far behind most states. I think it's still in like 40th place among the states. So storing more of our money away for a rainy day instead of spending it on, let's say, a new property tax relief program or another corporate tax credit for the film industry, right? Like, it would be important to try to shore up as much revenue as we can, and to start to do some of those revenue raisers now, to start raising taxes on the wealthy, to start raising taxes on big corporations and closing loopholes, because you can't do that overnight, right? That needs time to get set into place. And if suddenly you wake up and it's December 2026 and you lost $2 billion in federal funding, you can't like come up with $2 billion out of the clear blue sky. You have to have that stored up, ready to go, to help ensure that the state can continue to protect its own residents, even if the feds are abdicating their own responsibility. One final note here that I'll flag, this is a little in the weeds. Sort of mentioned the state and local tax deduction, the so-called SALT deduction. This allows people who pay higher amounts of state and local taxes to deduct those taxes from their income for federal income purposes. Now, this disproportionately benefits wealthy residents who tend to have more tax liability at the state level, especially in a state like New Jersey, which has a progressive tax system, such that lower income folks tend not to reach that threshold. But one thing this does do, if the threshold does go up at the federal level, is it does give the state a little bit more leeway to start raising its own taxes, because if they're going to get it back at the federal level, then we can start raising taxes on the wealthy, and they can go get their deduction from the feds instead. And so I do think there's some opening there for trying to address some of those concerns. But I think, broadly speaking, the switcheroo, the scam of this whole bill is the cost of the tax cuts just for people earning over $1 million. That $1 trillion pile is roughly the equivalent of the cost of cutting Medicaid and SNAP for the neediest Americans. So like that trade-off, that's the whole bill. And so the impact on a state like New Jersey, even though New Jersey tends to have higher income, tends to have lower poverty, is still devastating on what the state budget will look like and on the lives of individual residents. And we can see those trickle-down effects throughout the economy of the state. So I'll pause there, and we can chat a little bit more if you have questions. We're the good news crew. We're just
we are going to be passing out some index cards for people to put down questions that they might have for the speakers. And while that's going on, what I wanted to do was ask the two speakers, did they have questions for each other?
Well, I did have a question for you.
Okay.
So one thing that's come up with the question of political appointees, right? This is a long-standing battle between civil service and political appointees. There's an argument that has been made that a progressive or liberal administration might want to have more political appointees, might want to be able to remove sort of burrowed civil servants and enact their policies more effectively. So why? Obviously, it's bad if your preferred person is not in office, but in terms of like the effectiveness of government, why wouldn't you want more political appointees as opposed to more civil service?
So let me give two answers to that question. The first is that there are already 4,000 presidential appointees sitting atop the executive branch. Most administrations do not fill those 4,000 positions. So if there were 12,000, 50,000, etc., it's highly likely that most of those positions, rather than being people that are in ideological alignment with you, will just go unfilled, and it will not be easier to accomplish your mission. The second thing is that most of those positions require some level of technical expertise. If you're going to be at the EPA, it's important to have scientists that understand the difference between 10 parts per million and 5 parts per million of arsenic in your water and what the health impacts of that will be. The likelihood that you're going to find even liberal political appointees that are going to take those positions and say, okay, I'll do this for 3 or 4 years and that's it, as opposed to experts who have made their career understanding the effect of arsenic in water, is pretty small. And so having the expertise protected from political interference is, I think, good for policymaking regardless of who's in charge.
I agree with you. I just thought it. Yeah.
Do you have a question?
So a lot of the time, you know, and I know this was an Indivisible concern as well, but you're much closer to the ground, I think, than I am. A lot of times I tell people, call your congressman, call your legislators, etc. First of all, can you opine a little bit on the effectiveness of that? I happen to think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And second, what else out there, given these threats, can people do?
So, you know, state legislators represent a pretty small district. And so they're often responsive to requests for meetings from constituents. Calls to legislators' offices are, they measure them, right? They have a staffer answering the phone and they, you know, fill out who's answering. And, you know, given how few people, I think someone asked me once, like, how many people would you need to call a state legislator to get a meeting or to get them interested in a topic? And I was like, I don't know, like 6. Like, it's really not so many. But I think one question here is like, what do you ask for, right? Saying like, I need you to stand up for a stronger budget surplus is like, what is that? Like, it's not something that's easy to get sort of agitated about. And I do think that, for example, saying, you know, let's push back against some of these cuts to Medicaid. Yeah, they all agree. They're like, yeah, let's push back to these cuts to Medicaid. What does that mean? Like, they don't, you know, they have limited ability to like exert pressure on the federal government to do stuff. And so I think it's sometimes tricky for them. They say like, well, what do you want from me? Like, I'm a state legislator. I have one role, which is to propose legislation at the state level. What can I do? And so I think there are legislative ideas that would help. But right now, what we're hearing is, we don't know what's going to happen in DC. It's chaos. Let's wait till we see what they actually do, and then we can figure out our defense. And I think our position, certainly my position, is that we have to be shoring up now, right? We have to be thinking about our defensive positioning now to ensure that our residents don't get left without health insurance, without food assistance, without heat assistance in the winter, if these cuts go through, right? And I think that's just, you know, asking them to start planning for the worst case scenario, because, you know, as we're seeing, the worst case scenario can happen, and it can even get worse every time. So, you know, like, I think that's just something that I would say, you know, certainly calling is an effective strategy. I know that I don't have to tell Indivisible about calling your congressperson. But, you know, I do think that ideological polarization at the federal level does make it difficult to get this, even compared to like what happened during the Affordable Care Act. You know, I think it is harder to get leverage now. You know, thinking about the same kind of institutional knowledge that exists in career civil servants. There's a, you know, institutional knowledge that existed in Congress as well. Yeah. And, you know, I think half of Congress was not there during the last Trump admin. Like, so like even that has turned over in a way that makes it difficult to like get that kind of traction. So I do think there are probably additional sort of strategies and pressure points that are needed, but I think it is tough because this is legislation that's moving at the federal level, and it's hard to exert that kind of leverage, especially now that the fight has moved to the Senate, where both members of our Senate delegation are unlikely to vote for this thing. But I do think, again, like, so as an example, one of the big campaigns that I helped work on was the corporate transit fee, which was a tax that's placed on companies that do business in New Jersey and have more than $10 million a year in profits to help fund New Jersey transit. And this was a fight for a number of years. The governor and the legislative leaders said, we will never, ever, 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 ever do this. And then, over time, it's there, it's the law now. So we did it. But one of the ways that happened is from mayoral support. Mayors could see the harms of not having a functioning transit system, and so they were willing to go and talk to their state legislators about how much they needed transit to be working, and that there had to be a revenue source that was found, and this revenue source already happened to exist, right? So I do think that there are other avenues to think about trying to exert pressure, thinking about local government, because again, as much as state legislators serve you, they also are connected with their local political, the mayors and the towns, and seeing the impact on a local level helps to make the case stronger at the state and hopefully again at the federal level. But it is tough.
What is the capacity of the state government and the state legislature to actually begin to plan for what's coming down the pike?
I mean, certainly the state departments are already planning. The Department of Human Services is already thinking about this. But it's a lot of triage, right? It's saying, if we lose this amount, how much are we going to have to cut benefits? Or how much are we going to have to, reduce already low provider reimbursement rates? How can we make work requirements that are less onerous? Although the federal requirements seem to be trying to make it as onerous as possible. And of course, pass the cost onto the state to administer the work requirement system. So I think they are planning already about what they need to do. But it's tough because we're going to be in a gubernatorial turnover. So, many of the folks who are in charge at these departments aren't going to be there in a year. And they certainly won't be there in December 2026 when the Medicaid work requirements kick in. So, I think there's definitely planning taking place, going back to this importance of having career civil servants. But, at the legislative level, we are an incredibly short-sighted state when it comes to one-year cycles. We just passed this year's budget, and next year's budget is next year's problem. And because we have 2-year election cycles in the Assembly, we're always in an election year, right? Because we're off year. So it's always an election year for somebody somewhere. And so that puts different kinds of pressures on the state legislature to plan in advance. Again, there are sort of like technical changes that I think would be helpful, stuff like multi-year budgeting, like actually having multi-year revenue planning and forecasting. We basically only plan 1 year's worth of revenue. So I'm sure that both the treasurer and the Office of Legislative Services, they're doing a projection. They're just not sharing it with anybody because, it's going to have, error bars, and they don't want that to show. So they're just saying, well, we have this year's projection, which is what we're legally required to do, and that's what we've done.
Okay. Peter, do you have any particular sort of trend in any of those questions?
Not to,
From the audience, I should say.
Yeah. Well, the first is, what is the likelihood that Republicans in either Congress or the legislature will oppose these bills, these Trump bills?
Well, I'll take Congress if you take the legislature.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it is. It's low. It's not zero. There are the control of the party that the president and the speaker have achieved is fairly remarkable in my life from what I've seen in my lifetime. It's not absolute, but it's fairly strong. And in part, that's a result of the primary system and the fact that many members in Republican districts and Republican states are more likely to be unseated in a primary than they are in a general election. So they worry about that more than they worry about. It's not true of everyone. There are seats here in New Jersey. Someone mentioned Tom Kaine. It's likely not true in that district. It's not true in Don Bacon's district in Nebraska. It may not be true for Susan Collins or a couple of other senators. Those people on this toward the centrist wing of the party may get upset if the cuts to Medicaid are too strong. Indeed, surprisingly, Josh Hawley, for I think separate reasons, has come out and said that he does not want to see Medicaid cut. So there is a little bit of unpredictability there. There's a little bit less unpredictability on the other side of the ideological spectrum of the Republican Party. There's one vote in the House you can count on, which is Thomas Massie, to go ahead and say, this increases the deficit, I'm voting against it. Most of the people who seem to voice that view seem to back down the moment there's any pressure put on them. And so I don't have much faith that they will change their views. But because the margins, particularly in the House, are so small, it doesn't take many to dislodge the equilibrium. Many of the people that voted for the bill last week are hoping that the Senate changes it, and that when it comes back to them to vote on again, it's something more to their liking. Of course, to the degree the Senate changes it, it may upset other people in the Republican caucus. So this isn't done by a long stretch, but I'd be lying if I said I thought it was going to come out much, much better.
On the state legislative side, it's tricky because Republicans tend to be in the minority in the legislature, and therefore the good functioning of government is not necessarily like, it doesn't redound to them in any negative way. So like if the government stops working effectively, that's not a problem necessarily. It's just something else to criticize about the majority party. And we've seen already, there was a resolution to again, a non-binding resolution for the Assembly, just to say, if the House passes the reconciliation bill and has lots of cuts in Medicaid, that would be bad for New Jersey. And it was you can go look at the debate on the floor. Many members in the Republican Party came out and said this is an exaggeration, this is fear-mongering, this isn't really going to happen. Never mind that the CBO, the nonpartisan CBO, put out estimates of 13 million people losing health insurance nationally, which would translate to 200,000 New Jersey residents losing health insurance. You can just say, well, it's not going to happen. And again, because they're backloaded, they might not happen for 2 years, 3 years. It'll be like Real ID, it'll just keep moving a little bit. But eventually it will happen. And if you have harsh work requirements, which the bill proposes, then people will lose their coverage. There's just no way around it. Right? There is ample evidence from states that have done work requirements for Medicaid and for SNAP that all the work requirements do is kick people off. They don't increase anyone's rate of working because most people want to work. And if they are not working, it's usually for a reason that's either outside of their control or because they're retired. They are in school, they are disabled. And so that's who ends up losing coverage. So, although I will say, I have, any time that I think I know how things are going to happen in the future, I am often told, events prove otherwise, right? If you were to tell me that, John Roberts would save the Affordable Care Act and that John McCain would save the Affordable Care Act a second time, I would not have believed you. And yet, those things did happen. So, I'm not saying we should hope for any of those things this time in terms of optimism level, but the world is a strange place.
So, I have a couple of sort of rules. Peter, can you speak up a bit? Can you hear me?
No.
So, one that I have here says, what has, if any, the Murphy administration said it will recommend to address these issues? And I have a related one that says, what would you want to see from New Jersey's current and future governor to protect New Jersey's interests?
So,
has
yeah, I mean,
Murphy said anything? And
I think the Murphy administration has been fairly loud about how damaging these cuts will be. Actually, tomorrow, governor's holding a roundtable in Lakewood, going to the heart of red Ocean County to talk about how devastating Medicaid cuts will be for Lakewood and Jackson, and right, like it will hit Ocean County very hard. And so I think he's been out talking about some of this, and certainly his state departments have been doing a lot of legwork, particularly the Department of Human Services, which deserves a shout out for putting together a lot of modeling on what the damage of Medicaid cuts will be to hospital systems, to individuals who will lose coverage, and the damage that work requirements will cause, particularly for SNAP and Medicaid. So, I think that, but one thing that is challenging in this media environment is it's just hard to cut through the noise, right? If you walk down the street and just asked anyone about this bill, they would know nothing, right? And part of that is because of the media environment that we have, that we don't have any, whatever. Like there are lots of reasons why that is, but that works to the advantage of. There's a reason why they're passing all these bills at 10 at night and 1 in the morning, and voting all the way through the night, right? Because they don't want people paying attention. It's easier to get sidetracked, and saying whatever. Proposed House budget bill where everyone's already asleep. They're not. They're already zoned out, and so I think that's part of the challenge as well. Is as loud as the governor can be on this topic, can it cut through? Are people going to pay attention to it? I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that Murphy does have a unique status in that he is a lame duck at this point. And so I'm thrilled to hear that he's going to be in Lakewood and places like that talking about this. I mean, what he has now in 6 months left in office is a bully pulpit. And to the extent that he can use that to highlight the kind of things Peter's been talking about, I think is really important. And I'd love to see him do it every day.
Going back to the second part of that, what would you want to see from the current and future governor in terms of actually protecting New Jersey's interests? That is, looking for and proposing possible solutions or partial solutions.
So, New Jersey policy perspective is a C3. We don't endorse, we don't electioneer. But our sort of policy blueprint that we've outlined for the next 4 years really tries to strengthen. We have a federalist country, right, in which states can implement policies separate from the feds, and we encourage the state to do more of it, right? To pass more protections for immigrant residents, to separate our tax system more from the federal tax system, in order to make it more just, and again, I think on the revenue raising side, I understand that it is not a popular position to say we should raise taxes in New Jersey. But one thing that we see consistently in political polling is that raising taxes on the wealthy, raising taxes on big corporations, raising taxes, finding tax cheats and collecting those taxes for the rest of us. Those are things that are popular, and they're certainly more popular than program cuts. So I think that's something that is worth running on. And the more revenue that we have available, the more that we can fund the kinds of programs that can, protect us from some of those federal cuts. Again, probably not completely. Again, the feds can print money. That's why they're generally covering more of the cost of a lot of these programs. But there is a way for us to take some of the wealth, a tiny fraction of the wealth that this state has, and make it serve those who have the least.
One more question.
Oh, that's tough.
Okay, 2 more questions.
2 more questions. There you go.
I'll do the ones about taxes. Speak up. Hang on. several that are asking about how, because we send more tax revenue to the federal government than we get back from the federal government, how might that change? And will our federal taxes go down because they're taking away this funding to the states?
So,
I don't think they'll go down for everybody.
no, I think that's right. There was a great chart, and do you remember who put it out about the deciles of how people are going to be affected by
this
the
is based on
reconciliation
the
bill?
Penn-Wharton budget model.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Penn. So if you Google Penn Wharton, taxes will go down for the upper 4 or 5 deciles, the upper half of the income population. And so for those people, and believe it or not, I suspect many of the people in the room might fall into that. Not all, I'm sure, but many will. The economic burden, however, will increase on those at the lower end of the income spectrum, not because they'll be paying higher taxes, but because of the cutbacks that Peter will be talking about, and they won't be made up for by lower taxes on themselves because they're paying relatively low tax rates right now. But it is, as Peter said, it is a very regressive bill, which means money goes back towards the wealthier and comes away from the poorer.
I guess one thing I'll add about this sort of makers takers model of states and like states that pay more to the feds than they get back in benefits. I just don't think it's a particularly helpful way of thinking about. We have a federal government for a reason, right? And the idea is we are all one country, and we are all here to help each other. And states that have higher poverty rates, that are more reliant on government programs, that do not have, robust economic engines, right? The way that New Jersey does. The whole purpose of having a federal government, in large part, is to help even out these gaps, right? Help ensure that the wealth of New Jersey and New York and California and Texas go to help pay for Alabama and Kentucky and Nebraska and Wyoming, right? Like that's the point, right, of having a strong federal government. And again, I think it's important not to play into that kind of zero-sum thinking around state funding of, how individuals are funding the federal government, and instead to look at the big picture. Who is benefiting from this package the most? The thing about that chart that's really wild is something that's almost misleading about the chart is it makes it seem like there are a lot more, deciles, but actually what's happening is it's like the 80th to 90th percentile, and then the 90th to 95th, and then the 95th to 99th, and the 99.9. So like at the very 99.99999th percentile, it's like they're getting $385,000 from this, and everybody else is just like down here, right? And then one final note is, this goes back to a point that Stuart made earlier, is no one's going to see a substantial tax change because most of the tax changes in the bill are just an extension of the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts. There are some changes, but they make up a very small fraction of the overall tax change. So just, in terms of like, will your federal tax bill change? Probably not, other than the potential for an increased SALT deduction. But other than that, I would not expect much change in your federal taxes next year as opposed to this year.
And I'll just add, completely agree with Peter in that if we believe in redistribution of resources down the income spectrum, it is inconsistent with that belief to say, well, New Jersey is paying too much, so other people to other states, because we are one of the richer states. And I do think it is very much, we can't also, as Peter said, play into that that mentality that our current leader loves, that everyone else has to suffer so we can be better off. That's just not the way to think about these things.
And the people that will suffer most are people in red states.
Yep.
Right? People whose social safety net is already riddled with holes, who are already losing out on Medicaid because they already have work requirements, and they have more stringent work requirements, right? It's the reason why Josh Hawley is so mad.
Yep.
Arkansas is going to get slammed.
Missouri.
Missouri. Who's Arkansas? Who am I thinking? Yeah.
Missouri's beginning to look like Arkansas.
So I think that's something to keep in mind. Is like the people who will get hurt the most are all in those red states, right, where they're already facing whatever. They already have abortion restrictions and everything else that are holding them back. No minimum wage, whatever.
So one final question on here. Do states have any flexibility in how they could implement the proposed Medicaid work requirements? When Arkansas implemented these, they created big paperwork reporting hurdles that led some working people to lose their Medicaid.
So the current reconciliation bill, not a lot. And one of the reasons for that is one additional change that they made in the current proposal is that redetermination has to happen every 6 months instead of every 12 months. So states have to implement these work requirements. They're pretty stringent in terms of essentially how much paperwork there has to be, because there has to be a lot of verification. If you have cash income, if you're working part-time, if you don't have a W-2, it becomes much harder to complete the work requirement. Again, it's even more stringent than what we have for Workforce New Jersey, or what the states that do have work requirements currently have. So I think it is very hard. I'm sure that they are thinking about ways to find flexibility, but again, all of these plans will have to be approved by the feds. And so it's not clear what would be able to pass muster, especially since we don't know what the final bill language is going to be. But I would say under the bill language as currently written, it would be very hard to try to find a way to make it substantially less onerous.
And I'll just add, because I spend a lot of time thinking about paperwork and paperwork burdens on individuals and on businesses and all that. Paperwork is policy making, sort of stealth policy making. You can achieve your policy aims without saying those are your policy aims by kicking people off of Medicaid, by just making it really hard to get Medicaid. You can discourage people from voting by putting a lot of barriers in the place to get registration. For businesses, you can shut down businesses by making them fill out a lot of paperwork and have to employ people to do that. That favors big businesses over small businesses. So all paperwork it's easy to overlook, but policymakers have discovered that it's a way to achieve your aims without having to take the political hit that comes with them.
Okay. Can I hear a round of applause? What we're going to do now is we're going to try and see how we could cope with all of this optimistic news. And one of the things that we've been talking about amongst a number of people as we've been trying to read this is a huge set of activities and a huge set of negative consequences. And we can't fight them all. We can't fight many of them even on the federal level. And so the issue becomes, how do we try and make the world a better place, which is what a lot of us believe is what we're supposed to be here on the world, on the earth to do. How do we do that with the scope of these kinds of problems? So what we'd like to do for the next roughly half hour is to ask people to divide into a couple of smaller groups, simply because a lot of people don't like to talk in front of a huge group. And we'd like you to sort of think of what they've heard and put down on another index card, what is the negative consequence or the cost or the hurt that might be coming out of some of these things? What is the one that most gets your goat? Either that you're angriest about, you're saddest about, you're furious about, you're anxious about. Which ones? And the ones we're asking, why we're asking this, is we're starting to do a process by which we can identify what kinds of things we in Indivisible Highland Park can start to go after. we can't, obviously, all the will in the world, we can't do everything. And so we need to figure out what priorities there are. So if people could think about all the things they saw and maybe, ask each other, did I really hear that straight or whatever? Write it down. And then what we'd like to do is get into several small groups because we'd like to see what other people say. It might change your mind. It might clarify what you're talking about. It might make you focus even more. And at the end, we'd like it if you could, if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you would put your name on the card. Because what we're going to try and do is basically people who are interested in the same kind of issue, of working on the same kind of problem. We want to be able to draw you together, and we can all start to work to figure out what are various things that a local grassroots group can do. So that's what we'd like. Looking around, Kevin is going to be leading one group. Peter's going to be leading one group. Rosella is going to be leading one group.
And you can lead a group.
I'm going to be leading. Okay. Would people who, let's see, the group right around here, let's take about 5 or 6 people. They'll be in my